Hello everybody, we are living the dream and I am so excited because we are here today with Jessica Herthel, who is the author of I Am Jazz. I don't know if you've had a chance to read this book, but it is amazing for the trans community and I just love it and I am so excited to be talking to you today.
Thank you.
So Jessica, tell me, what inspired you to be writing about jazz?
So this started out for me as a very selfish endeavor. I have 3 of my own kids and I was interested in my own children being able to go out into the world and interact with people who are different from them and not be afraid just because someone, goes by a word that they don't recognize, like transgender. I wanted them to be comfortable, kind of leading with kindness, and it was just inspired by my own desire to raise my kids to be good people, really.
This book is so important, and I'll tell you why for me too, because I have a son who's gay, and from the time he was little, we always suspected that he was gay. And, when you're a first-time parent, I've never raised a child before, never raised a gay child before, so I don't want to put, behavior in a box because every child is different. Not all gay children may express more femininity or masculinity that's different than what our gender roles say we should be, but we always suspected. And when he came out finally in his 20s, it was very clear to me that gender identity or sexual identity is not just about sex. It is your orientation to the world. It's the way you are hardwired. So how did Jazz's story impact you so much that you wanted to write a book about it?
I think what's so great about Jazz as an advocate and why her story has become kind of the foundation for a lot of other stories that have been told is that she was so articulate from such a young age. So as soon as she could speak, she really was saying mama girl. And as soon as she could choose her own clothes, she was choosing her sister's clothes. And she would kind of fight when, the brother hand-me-downs would come her way. And I think what's so compelling about Jazz's story is that she has been so clear from such a young age about who she is. It was never about sex. It was never about romantic relationships. That's some of the pushback I get as I now advocate in schools around the country. Is some parents will say, well, they're too young to know. They don't understand sex. I say, no, this has nothing to do with sex or romance or love. It's just about identity. And no child is too young to know who they are. So I think that's part of why it was so easy to tell Jazz's story, is that she's been so clear and consistent from the time she was young, and I think it really breaks down a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah.
People who conflate gender identity and sexual orientation and think they're the same thing. They're obviously not.
They are not. So I'm showing you the book again. So I Am Jazz. So now this is based on a real person. So Jazz was born with presenting male.
Appeared to be a boy, yeah.
And then just as she developed, came to recognize that she identified as female. And she is now, how old is Jazz?
So she just turned 18.
18.
And she completed her gender confirmation surgery over the summer. So, in a sense, that part of her journey is now behind her. And she's just living as a trans woman now. But she doesn't have that kind of hanging over her head, which I think when you're young and you've got gender dysphoria, you're kind of wondering, am I going to make that step? Am I going to, do the procedures and kind of undergo all the physical transformation. And I think what's so great about Jazz is she's always very quick to say this is not for everyone. Not everyone chooses to do a medical intervention. She was on blockers from the time she was very young, maybe 8 or 9 years old, because she was just very sure about how she did and did not want her body to change. But she's, such a great example of this is a very individual path. For everyone's path will be different, and for her, this was the right choice. But she really supports people who don't make that choice, and they're just as legitimate in their identity as someone who does.
I really wish that there had been books like this available for me when my son was young, because I really understand the significance and the power of story, because the stories we tell us who we are and who we can be. And when stories like this are not present in our classrooms, in our libraries, in our communities, we think that it doesn't exist. We think that it's not possible, when in fact there are countries that fully accept transgender identity and people along the continuum. It has been a long, I can't say tradition is not even the word. It is just an accepted part of what being a community is.
And certain cultures revere people whom they call,
Two-spirit,
or the third gender, and it really just depends on where you're lucky or unlucky enough to be born, whether this is something that would be revered and respected or condemned and criticized.
Because the way that I've started to see this now is because I have attended some LGBTQ ally or club organizations in the past to see this, and once you see the breadth and spectrum of people's identity, it doesn't fit back in the box anymore. That our human brains are trying to make sense of something and put it in two boxes. I have to tell you, I went to a baby shower the other day, and one of the games they had was they had little ducks, boy ducks and girl ducks, and then they had they had ducks and they had two different ponds, like a boy fish pond and a girl fish pond, and people were supposed to put the ducks in whichever one they wanted to guess. And I was thinking, you're going to need a bigger pond.
Yeah.
You need just an Olympic-sized pool.
Right. It shouldn't be two separate ponds.
Exactly.
You can decide where along the river you want to place your duck. But I say all the time, the future really is non-binary. Whether that's non-binary gender expression, and you'll just have to get used to seeing people. Someone explained to me we have a reptilian brain, and when you meet someone, your reptilian brain wants to put them in a box, friend or foe. Are you a threat or are you not a threat? And our brains are going to have to evolve and adjust to, okay, there's a person I can't tell from looking at them whether they're boy, girl, and it doesn't really matter. Same with sexual orientation. When I go to high schools, a lot of high school kids now say, well, I'm pansexual. I don't want to declare who I'm going to fall in love with. I just want to be open to a relationship with whomever it is. And I think that's really the future, is people not putting each other in boxes and being more comfortable with a spectrum. And why would we want to box each other? I mean, the human condition is such a very colorful rainbow. Why would we want to tell people pick a color and stay in that lane?
And I think that's so important because it just it reminds me every day that we are in charge of our brains, that we are not our thoughts. We get to choose at any time, and that it's up to us to learn how to tame those thoughts, that our brain's going to want to throw up ideas to say, okay, this person has to be this way because of how they look, and that is just not true.
It's also not fair, especially when you have a child and you say, well, you're a boy and you need to wear this and have this haircut and have this name, and those are all really, just social constructs anyway. There's nothing that came down from on high that said men have short hair and women have long hair. That's just something we as a society here have decided, and of course it's not the same in other cultures. So I think we need to kind of take a step back and above all these assumptions and realize how human they all are, and how we need to, like you said, train our brains, even when it comes to the they pronoun. So many people are struggling with that, to say, oh, Sandra's here and they're sorry they're late. But once you do it a few times, it becomes natural, especially when you do it repetitively and with intention. It doesn't feel so difficult anymore.
Exactly. It's all about getting used to the new normal, because even a friend of mine, I was talking about a person at work. They were expecting a baby, and this was right after gay marriage became legal. And I wanted to ask them, how is your... And I realized, I stopped because I realized I didn't want to assume that it was a husband or a wife. And I didn't want to use that. I remember asking somebody else, I said, I didn't have the words for what to say. I have to practice it so that I'll be comfortable saying, how's your partner? Or... I don't know what the word is.
Or co-parents.
And then one of the person I was talking to said, well, no, I think that it's fair that you can start with an assumption that it's a male or female. And I said, no, that's what the Supreme Court decision is about, that it's not okay to make those assumptions anymore, that to accept the greater possibilities of what the human spectrum is truly about. That's what the respect and equality is about.
I mean, there is pushback. Obviously, you see now, all you need to do is turn on the news, and there's a great pushback against this PC culture, where some people have decided, well, that's too much of an imposition. Asking me to say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, or asking me to say how's your spouse instead of how's your wife. Some people feel that it's a burden upon them, but I love the quote that says, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. When you're used to being in the majority, it feels like I'm burdening you by asking you to consider other people. But really, if you take a step back, it doesn't cost you anything to be more sensitive. And you're seeing someone who maybe isn't otherwise seen. You're saying, I see you. Your experiences also are valid. And I feel like, if there's pushback against that, that says something about us as a society, that we're not willing to think for a moment before we speak and say, well, what presumptions am I making? Or what heteronormative, preconceptions did I just have in my head that I should correct before they come out of my mouth? I don't think that's too much to ask.
And I think that's the root of the issue. Sometimes I say that sometimes people who say PC, who they call that out because you're asking them to think outside of the box that they are comfortable with. That sometimes I think PC is the PC way of saying F you.
Yeah.
That it's saying that you don't matter, your perspective doesn't exist for me, your life, your everything about you, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to think what I want to think, and I don't want to consider you in my perspective. And I think that that's very painful.
And it does feel like right now, there's a certain percentage of the population that feels that kind of laziness or kind of intellectual
rigor or practice.
Right. I think some people feel that we're in a moment now where it's okay to let your worst self show. Like, oh, yeah, I am racist. So what? Or I do think that, gays should keep it to themselves. I do think that there's a moment that we have to be aware of where the racists and the Islamophobes and the xenophobes and the misogynists, they've all been given permission to some extent. And I won't say why I think that is, but to kind of let their worst selves be out there. And I think we have to really call that out when we see it and say, no. Just because some people are letting their worst selves show, that doesn't mean we should show our children that example. We should still aspire to be better than all of those isms and isists
And I think that it's really an opportunity to help people to see that it is bigger than the boxes, that we all exist and we all deserve respect from each other, and we may need to find new words and new ways to make that happen. And I think your book, I Am Jazz, is really a great first step on this. Now I want you to talk about the I Am Jazz Day. Isn't there, they're working to have that happen.
Yeah.
Tell us about that again.
So it started in 2015. There was a little village in Wisconsin called Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. And I got an email in a cold night in November. It said, hi, I'm a parent in this small village. You don't know us. We wanted to let you know that there's a transgender first grader in our school. The school was about to read your book, and then we got a threat from the Liberty Council, which is based out of Florida, saying if you read this book in school, we'll sue you. And the parents of the community said, well, we're not taking this without a fight. They said, we're going to hold our own reading at a public library here in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, and we're going to go ahead and read this book because we know that there's a need for this book to be read. And so I got that email and I said, well, I want to be there. I want to help support what these parents are doing. So I got on a plane, I flew out to Wisconsin, and the community turned out, they put out 30 chairs in the room, and 600 people showed up to support the reading of the book. And the Human Rights Campaign saw that incredible outpouring of support and said, this is something we can replicate around the country. And if you give communities the opportunity to show up for their vulnerable students and families, people typically do. So this will now be the fourth year coming up that HRC sponsors a National Day of Readings. I think it'll be after the holidays this year. But it's been so great because it really gives schools an opportunity to say, yeah, we want to sign our names and sign this pledge so that kids in our community know that they're supported and seen just like those kids were.
Well, I am just so honored to meet you, Jessica, and this really falls in line with the work that I want to be doing with the Orange County Museum for Peace and Freedom. We want to create a place for people to celebrate and learn about how to make peaceful change and to allow greater freedoms for all in our communities. And I brought a pen asking you to sign my book for me. And I want to just thank you so much for doing
Sandra.
all you are doing and being
Doing. Thank you, Sandra, so much. So good to meet you.
So we are living the dream today. Peace out, everybody.
Thanks.
Jessica Herthel.
Bye.
Bye.